WBCK. You know, the Western Michigan University Cooley Law School Alliance, among other things, has brought together something called the Innocence Project. And in fact, the director of that project was just in Southwest Michigan yesterday talking about it, and she's with us this morning. So that's fortuitous if you didn't have a chance to hear Marla Marshall Cichon talk about the Innocence Project. You can hear her right now. Marla, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for the time today. We appreciate that. What is the Innocence Project?
Well, the WMU-Cooley Innocence Project is one of many innocence organizations throughout the nation, and our focus is to identify and investigate claims of factual innocence. And my clinic in particular focuses on DNA cases, meaning we look to test biological evidence that was collected at the crime scene to prove our client's innocence.
So just by virtue of the fact that there is a whole project dedicated to this, I suppose that's testimony to how much work there is to do in this field.
Yeah, that would be an understatement, at least in my own office.
Wow.
There's plenty of work to do. We're in the process of screening 12 cases that look very promising, meaning we've identified the biological evidence in the case, and we do believe that those cases meet the criteria for DNA testing in the state of Michigan. And then we have well over 100 to 150 requests for help pending.
I'm just letting that sink in a second. 12 cases currently working that you think have traction, and more than 100 that might have traction.
Yeah, it's hard to say whether the over 100 have traction or might have traction because, of course, a prisoner is going to write to us for a variety of reasons. So we only are looking to work on cases in which we can test biological evidence to prove innocence. So if a prisoner writes to us today after the radio interview and says, I really got a very long sentence that I'm not happy with, that's not someone we're going to help, and we're obviously going to screen that out early on in our review after a letter. On the other hand, during the screening process, we resolved every doubt about whether the case is a DNA case and whether or not we can assist that individual. We resolve that doubt in favor of the prisoner. And we have various levels of screening, which ultimately includes us then getting historical court records, the case being assigned to an undergraduate or law student or a team of students who thoroughly look into the history of the case and determine whether or not we can actually pursue a request for DNA testing.
That is very interesting, and we're going to talk more about that in just a minute on WBCK with Marla Marshall Cichon, the director of the WMU-Cooley Law Center Innocence Project. When we come back on WBCK 814. 816 WBCK. Our guest this half hour is Marla Marshall Cichon. She's the director of the WMU-Cooley Law School Innocence Project. And Marla, you talked about the dozen or so cases that you're working on now at the Innocence Project, which seem to have traction. That is to say, DNA could possibly prove that there are wrong convictions. More than 100 you're sifting through, and thousands you've reviewed over the years?
Yes, the project was started in 2001 when Michigan passed its first post-conviction DNA testing law. And since that time, we've screened over 5,300 cases.
Oh, my word. So, the immediate reaction might be, are we screwing things up royally here or what?
Well, it's an interesting question how many individuals in prison might be factually innocent. I think historically the conventional wisdom was, well, very few, because when you're in prison, what else do you have to do, right? But to say, I didn't do it. Mm-hmm. But what we've found, particularly since the inception of DNA testing in the late 1980s when it began use in the criminal justice system, we slowly began to identify cases where individuals were proven factually innocent through DNA testing, and it wasn't that they were not guilty. It was that they were factually innocent, which is a difference in our criminal justice system.
Yeah, let's understand that.
Well, of course, you and I are innocent right now. I mean, under the criminal justice system, if someone storms into the radio station this morning and arrests you, you're presumed innocent under the law.
Right.
But that might be different than whether you're actually or factually innocent. And, you know, that has a lot to do with the constitutional protections that we enjoy as citizens. And what's ironic and very sad and very challenging is that people who are factually innocent, who have been wrongfully convicted, it's very difficult to undo what has happened to them, because you really only get one shot at the apple. You have your criminal trial, and that's your one and only opportunity to challenge that you're the perpetrator of the crime. And if that trial goes wrong, or important information is hidden or unknown, then you are at risk of being wrongfully convicted in our country. And so, you know, there's studies out there that estimate the numbers, but I can say, that 1% would be a very conservative estimate. And the other thing is, we'll probably never know, because again, if you go back to my work, which is focusing on cases in which DNA evidence is involved, my biggest hurdle is the evidence still available? And if that evidence is destroyed, the only piece of evidence that might be utilized to now, 5, 10, 15 years later, prove their innocence is no longer available.
So I want to make sure I understand what factually innocent means. Does that mean simply that the facts of the case under which a conviction and a sentence is now being served are incorrect? Is that what that means?
You know, there's a debate about what that definition is, but the one you just provided was very good. I think that lawyers would say, once you're granted a new trial, you're back to being a regular citizen again, right? You're presumed innocent. Until proven guilty. And in Michigan, my clients who have been exonerated, which is the term we use after someone's wrongful conviction has been set aside, the facts of those cases all strongly suggest that it's, in fact, in Ken Wynemko's case, our first exoneree, the actual perpetrator was identified 5 years after he was exonerated. So, again, people might debate what the definitions are, but again, these are people who clearly did not participate in any way in the crime for which they were charged and convicted.
And I think the presumption is, when you think about, when the average person thinks about what it means to be wrongfully convicted, the presumption is that somebody else is out there who is the real perpetrator. But what you've said is, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there could be a conviction out there that is just incorrect based on the facts of the case. That person still might be guilty. Is that true?
No.
Okay.
It is an instance of, in all three of the cases in which we were able to release our client, other men were responsible for the rape that occurred, not my client. Now, there are cases of factual innocence where no crime occurred. For example, this happens a lot in arson cases. It happens a lot in child death. You might have heard the term shaken baby. So there are instances where someone is exonerated or after being wrongfully convicted in which no crime occurred. Presumably, in the cases that I'm working on, which are typically serious, crimes like murder and criminal sexual assault, typically there is a real victim to the crime. And, of course, that person is not getting justice. Neither are the citizens of the state of Michigan if the wrong person is in prison.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. Marla Marshall Cichon is with us, the director of the WMU-Cooley Law School Innocence Project, and we'll continue in just a minute on WBCK. WBCK, we are talking with Marla Marshall Cichon, the director of the WMU-Cooley Law School Innocence Project, that is to say, uncovering by way of DNA evidence those who are wrongly convicted. It's just a tremendous undertaking, and now you've been recognized for that at the Innocence Project with a grant, haven't you?
Yes, I'm delighted to learn that the project was granted a $418,000 grant from the Department of Justice to
Wow.
support the very important work that we do. And these funds will allow me to increase my staff, which is always needed. But in particular, it also provides funding for hiring experts and investigators and to pay for DNA testing. So defraying those types of costs are critically important. It will also allow me to involve more directly Western undergraduate students, which I started to do last summer. And I'm working with Professor Ashlyn Kirsten at WMU, and we're developing, she's developing a course for the Western students, and we are going to work collaboratively to expand the educational experiences for undergraduate students, as well as meet the needs of screening the many cases that need to be screened in my office. So I'm very excited about collaborating with Ashlyn and the Western students at WMU.
Yeah, that's part of this that we haven't spent a whole lot of time talking about. That is to say, the skills that make one a good lawyer, I suppose, are often honed when you're working on projects like this. That is to say, reviewing the facts and critically looking at cases that have already taken place. This is an education.
Again, I couldn't have said it better. Thank you. The students are assigned their own caseload, and they are responsible for their cases. Of course, they're closely supervised by myself and my staff attorney, who is a licensed attorney in Michigan. But that's exactly what the students are learning to do. They're learning to be good lawyers and to look very critically and thoroughly. And what better way to do that in cases in which perhaps lawyers didn't do their jobs or prosecutors were unfair. So it not only does it teach them to be good lawyers, but it also exposes them and educates them about the criminal justice system, and they quickly learn that it's a system that needs some repair and that they can actually do something in their future career to repair it.
And by virtue of the fact that the Justice Department has handed you $400,000, it underscores a point that even the Justice Department says, we have some problems here, and these folks are willing to work on them.
Yes, the Department of Justice has generously given out grants. I had a grant in 2009 from the Department of Justice, and the focus is to identify and exonerate wrongfully convicted individuals in our country, because obviously this is not acceptable to have people in the United States of America in prison for crimes that they did not commit.
So, quickly here before I have to go, has this fostered a presumption in the community that DNA is just absolutely necessary when in some cases DNA just isn't available?
Well, that's a good point. DNA only comes into play into a very small percentage of cases. There's a talk all the time about the CSI effect. Certainly, if DNA may or may not be relevant in the case, and it's up to the lawyers involved in the case. Again, everything in life is about education. So it's up to the lawyers to educate the jury about why DNA is relevant in this particular case or why it is not. But it's typically not present in the typical crime. And it is a very reliable forensic tool that can identify or exclude an individual from a crime scene.
Wow, it is incredible. I've heard some investigators, police, saying that folks just expect DNA now. Let's go find it and put it to work. And certainly, if it's there, we can, but it's not always there.
Right. And again, what's discouraging from my end is that I review cases even in the 2000s where DNA was available, it was collected, it was relevant. Yet prior to the defendant's trial, they did not test it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Incredible. Well, I suppose we could go on for hours and hours talking about this, but let's stay in touch, and as things progress, we can have updates from you. How's that sound?
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you very much. Marla Marshall Cichon is the director of the WMU-Cooley Law School Innocence Project.